So we want to just share with you before we get started that our #1 goal for today is, as always, just to take care of ourselves and each other. That is the most important thing. So you will see me here today with my glass of water. Please feel free to eat, drink during this webinar, take stretch breaks as you need them, take eye breaks from your computer, do what you need to do to be safe and comfortable in this space today. Here's a little bit of our game plan for what we're going to be going over. We're going to spend a little bit of time together just doing some introduction and background on what the Pulitzer Center is, who Mizzen by Mott is, and how we're working together to bring 1619 project education materials into the after-school classrooms with incredible educators like all of you. After that, we'll take a little bit of a look at some of those resources in greater depth and do some practice warm-up activities from those resources. And then we'll be getting into some presentations from our amazing panelists, Karlin and Ashanti, talking a little bit more about how you can use them and methods for dealing with these topics in your spaces. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A afterward with Ashanti, Karlin, and Carlos, who are all experienced after-school educators. Please feel free to use the Q&A box anytime if you're thinking this is something that you want us to return to in that final session. And we hope you'll stick around at the end. We have a little survey for you to give us feedback, and also so that we can find out more about how you'd like us to follow up and support you further. So we'll go ahead and get started with a little bit of that introduction to these organizations, to our work together, and how we're working to support 1619 project resources, broadly speaking. So my name is Hannah, and I'm coming to you from the Pulitzer Center, which is a journalism organization with an education program that promotes awareness of underreported global issues, broadly speaking. And we do that by direct support to journalists who report on these underreported systemic issues around the world, as well as by bringing those journalists and the stories they cover into classrooms. Those journalists report on all different kinds of topics. Just a few of those themes are things that you can see on the screen here. And they publish them in many different outlets. So we're not a publication ourselves. Instead, we're collaborating with national, international, and small local outlets to get the word out about these systemic issues. We bring those stories and the journalists who are covering them into the classroom in part for reasons like what you see on the slide here. Studies are showing that students say that they feel more knowledgeable and prepared to take action in their communities when they're informed about what's going on with the news. But there are a lot of barriers to staying informed. So students might feel angry, sad, or depressed, or afraid when they're seeing what's going on in the world. I know I do a lot of the time. They're not necessarily seeing themselves well represented in the media, and they're not seeing those issues that matter most to them. So what we're doing at the Pulitzer Center is thinking about, after producing these news stories, how do we make sure that students are able to access the news that's most interesting to them, to process that in a healthy way, and also to think about what are the gaps, where's my story, and how might I be able to fill those in by telling stories of my own. So with that, the education mission at the Pulitzer Center is to cultivate a more curious, empathetic, and engaged public by connecting students and teachers with underreported global news stories and the journalists who cover them. And there are very few news stories that are more rooted in the history of the United States than the story of enslavement and anti-Black racism. And for that reason, the Pulitzer Center has been from the beginning the official education partner of the 1619 Project from the New York Times Magazine. So I'm curious to know from folks in this room what your level of familiarity with 1619 might already be. So go ahead and fill out this poll. Are you feeling really familiar with the project? You've done tons of exploration already. Maybe you've even been teaching it in your classrooms. Are you somewhat familiar, having explored some of those resources? Not familiar, you've heard about it and are curious to learn more? Or not familiar at all? This is really the first time that you're getting into it. We'll hold off and close this poll in 5, 2, 1. And it's really interesting to see the spread. Thank you so much for your responses. I'm seeing that a lot of people are somewhat familiar, so have explored some of the resources, but not all. And then there's a spread throughout the rest of these issues. So some of us are not familiar with the project. Some of us are deeply familiar and are experts already. But today we're going to do just a little bit of an overview of what the 1619 project is, and hopefully it'll give you a better idea of how you can do a deep dive on your own if it's something that that you haven't been introduced to quite as formally yet. So the 1619 project came out in August 2019 from the New York Times Magazine and was inaugurated with a special issue of that magazine that contains over 18 essays by journalists and historians, as well as creative works, poems, stories, and drama inspired by key moments in United States history. There's also beautiful photography, artwork, and primary sources as part of that magazine. There's also a broadsheet that includes a photo history of enslavement in the United States through objects from the National Museum of African American History and Culture's collection, and an essay analyzing how slavery is taught in United States schools. There's a 5-episode podcast that you can find that corresponds to many of the essays and presents them in a creative way, as well as a kids section of the New York Times that's made to be accessible for younger learners. Coming out in November, you can also be on the lookout for an anthology, a new forthcoming book from Penguin Random House, both one for adults and high school students, as well as one that will be a children's book, a picture book available. The essays and materials from the 1619 project are all designed to help us understand how the legacy of enslavement persists in the United States, as well as how the contributions of Black Americans have shaped everything that we see around us in contemporary life, connecting everything from healthcare to music, from our system of punishment to traffic jams around the country, to that historical connection and the systemic issues that persist today. Teachers and students across the country have responded with enormous enthusiasm, creativity, and passion to this project. It's been taught in all 50 states and integrated into after-school programming, into libraries and informal book groups, as well as into classrooms. Some examples of how students have responded include projects where students have connected the 1619 project to their own communities and done investigative journalism pieces, analyzing how they can see the same issues that appear in the magazine manifesting in their own communities. They've also created school-wide events where students have been able to showcase beautiful art, poetry, dance, and other sorts of responses to the 1619 project. And I'll give you a moment to read the kinds of quotes that students are sharing with us about their experiences. For all of these reasons, we are incredibly excited to be partnering with Mizzen by Mott to bring the 1619 project resources into the after-school education space. And to share a little bit more background about that, I'm going to turn things over to Carlos.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And again, everyone, welcome. And yes, I mean, we're excited here at Mizzen by Mott to be able to host such incredible, important work for the after-school field. For those of you who are not familiar, Mizzen is a content platform that really hosts high quality educational content for youth that really engage and spark learning in our young people, as well as resources for staff to really improve and continue to upskill their skill set and competencies in leading after school work. So we're very honored and proud to host this material. So a little bit about us, right? We really focus on learning that engages. And so for us, that means that we want to make sure that our content is really centered around the inquiry, curiosity, project-based hands-on learning for young people so that they can continue to fall in love with the art of learning, I would say. So we focus on learning that engages. In addition to, we also provide resources that equip practitioners, as I said earlier, because for us, we know that alongside young people really loving to learn, it's also equally important, if we can go to the next bullet, for staff that are equipped to be able to facilitate the learning, because we know there's an amazing content out there for everyone, this being one of them, but there's also equally important is the how you deliver the content. And so we want to be able to support this ongoing skill and competency set for staff on delivering great experiences through great content. And then finally here is we want to provide access for all, because we know whether you're a small program, larger program, rural, city, that we want to provide equal access to great content. That's why this content is free. So if you go to mizzen.org, sign up, you can immediately dive into the work and find yourself with 1,500 pieces of content right off the bat for you across all types of disciplines, from STEM, SEL, career exploration, entrepreneurship, health and wellness, equity programming, and so on and so forth. So we want to provide that access for everyone. So that is a bit about us. And not only is it really about content, but it's also about building community, because we know when we look at this gathering here today, yes, what brought us together is great content, but what's going to keep us together is if we build a community around this content. That's why when the minute that I heard about this workshop, I hit up Ashanti, you have to join me. I saw the work that you did in Oakland. You've got to be part of this community. And I'm sure the same thing happened with Karlin. You got a phone call, Karlin, you got to come join us, right? So building this community is what keeps content alive. And then finally, the idea of what are the experiences that we are going to feel when we come together? Because it's not enough to just come together. It's also our energy, our passion for this work that builds a certain type of experience when we come together. Okay, next slide. And so how does content, community, and experiences apply to our partnership with Pulitzer and the 1619? Well, number one is for the last 2+ years, the country has spoken. All 50 states have been diving into 1619. And I've really appreciated the background that Hannah and her team over at Pulitzer have given us in terms of how educators have taken this base material and they have built hundreds and thousands of lessons, activities, community builders, hands-on experiences on this root material that is 1619. So we know that, educators have spoken. We need to make sure this content shows up for the after-school practitioner too. In terms of community, we know what it's like when we come together. And for the 1619 piece, we have to make sure that as practitioners in the after-school space, take this content, that we elevate their voice, that we elevate their practice. So for us, it's important that as a community, we do this. And then finally, the experiences is about the energy that we bring. Because when you go to back in those days, when you used to go to conferences in person, it wasn't just the workshops, but it was those informal moments where you connected in the hallways, where you connected. And that's how, in many ways, that's how Ashanti and I met, was through just an informal kind of introduction. We built community, and then we started creating experiences together. And so we want to be able to create that same type of collective vision for us in this 1619 community. Okay. And then we want to talk a little bit about the content that sits on there now. We know that, and this is me just from my personal experience, that learning needs to be inspired and informed. And so if we go to the next bullet, when I heard that first podcast from 1619, if you go to Mizzen, sign up, go to the 1619 project playlist, amazing. That first podcast grabs you right away. And so we know that there's both inspiration and information that's part of the 1619 collection. And we also know that young people, they want to know the origins of what they're learning. And I really believe that the content here is that's really one of its strengths, is it takes young people through a journey to understand, to reflect, and to really look back and go, what's the retrospect of this history? And I believe that that's where learning comes from, when young people can go back to the origins of the content they've heard about, maybe seen in films, maybe talked about informally, for them to be taken back. And I think that's what this content does so powerfully. It takes you back and it gives you the origin of the work. And so for us, we know that we have this added responsibility. And that's why I knocked on Ashanti's door, said, Ashanti, help us continue building resource. Because the material in here, I feel like you have to be in a certain state of mind. You've got to be ready for this material. And I really feel like as a content entity, as a community, and as an entity that convenes and communes people, that we have to build resource that continues to prepare practitioners to provide these great experiences around 1619. So that's a quick flyover of our role as Mizzen. So again, we're honored to be able to host this. Please come visit us, sign up today, and really start diving into 1619. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Carlos. And we'll talk more about how you can sign up for Mizzen in just a few minutes and access these resources. So we wanted to give you just a little bit of an overview of what you're going to find when you follow those steps that Carlos has laid out for us. So the 1619 project after school resources are housed on the Mizzen by Mott app. And you'll see just a few examples of the activities that you'll find when you go to where those resources are housed. So what we've done is constructed a number of 45 to 90-minute activities for after school periods that are highly interactive for students and take bite-sized pieces of 1619 text, podcasts, photos and multimedia resources and creative works from the full project, and uses those as a way of exploring both the history of enslavement and in this country, and also the legacy of it today, in addition to joy and contributions of Black Americans that make and shape the way this country, the best things about the United States today. So we want to share with you just an example of what this can look like in the classroom with a quick warm up. So we're going to get started by zeroing in on this activity that you see on the screen here called Erasure Poetry as Resistance. So I'll ask you to think about this question on the screen before I launch a poll. Imagining that you're thinking about the word erase. What are your associations with that word? Are they positive? Are they negative? Are they somewhere in between? On a 5-point scale, where might you put yourself? If you were in a classroom right now, you might be able to launch a poll for students, but you could also ask them to move along the room, get some motion going, and to start thinking about this question. What does erasure mean to you? I'm seeing folks move along in our poll. We'll close down in 3, in 2, in 1. And take a look at where your colleagues are on this spectrum. We don't see anybody who's saying the word erase is 100% positive to me, but there is a little bit of a range of how we're feeling about that word. And please feel free to share in the chat. Why did you put in the answer that you did? We'll come back to those answers that you're sharing in the chat, but we also want to share with you one of those short multimedia resources that are available as part of the 1619 Project After School resources. And in this video, you'll hear from Nicole Hannah-Jones, the architect of the 1619 Project and one of its major contributors.
They say our people were born on the water. The teal eternity of the Atlantic Ocean had severed them so completely that it was as if nothing had ever existed before. That everything they ever knew had simply vanished from the earth. I grew up in the Midwest. I really saw the landscape of inequality through my school bus windows. The houses started getting nicer, the streets were repaired. And I just remember that the narrative about Black people just did not match what I saw in my daily life. I would sit in the classroom and feel that Black people had never done anything except to be owned by white people. My high school had a one-semester African American Studies course taught by the first and only Black male teacher I ever had. One of the books that he put in my hand said that the first Africans arrived in 1619, and I just remember I'd never heard that year before, and I knew that that was intentional. That erasure was powerful. I don't think that we tend to think of national memory as something that's intentionally created. We know about the Pilgrims. We know about George Washington cutting down the cherry tree. 1776, that sets in motion the founding of what would be the most liberatory democratic experiment in the history of the world. We were a country based on these freedoms, and that these freedoms are shared by all Americans. Well, the only way that you can believe that this country was the most liberatory, democratic nation that the world has ever seen is to, of course, erase the indigenous people who were already here. You, of course, have to ignore the enslaved Africans who arrived in the colony of Virginia in 1619, only 12 years after the English landed Jamestown. We're taught very, very little about slavery.
In 8th grade, we debunked the myth that slavery caused the Civil War. Instead, we learned the southern states felt as though their rights were being encroached on by the northern states.
The vast majority of high school kids don't even know that the Civil War was fought over slavery.
I couldn't believe the worksheet referred to enslaved people as African workers.
In the 5th grade, I was one of 3 Black girls in the class, and all 3 of us were assigned to be slaves during our presentation.
In 7th grade, my teacher announced that the Civil War had absolutely nothing to do with slavery.
All wars are fought for economic reasons.
We largely erase those narratives from the story, and therefore say that those stories are not important in the America that we ultimately became. But you can look across modern American life, America today, and see that almost nothing is untouched by the legacy of slavery.
We'll pause here. It's always hard for me to pause a video of Nicole Hannah-Jones speaking this kind of truth to us, but we'll definitely make sure that you have access to the rest of this video. And what we would do in a classroom right now is reflect on the way that Nicole Hannah-Jones is using that word that we've been reflecting on ourselves. What does it mean to erase in the context of a classroom? What does it mean to erase within a narrative, within the history of the United States? And what does this idea of national memory that she's bringing to the forefront mean? And how can we construct that both as institutions and as individuals? So I want to shout out some of the brilliance that I'm seeing in the chat here. I'm seeing folks are telling us a lot about the nuances of this word. Tiffany tells us erasing a blackboard makes room for a new knowledge to display, and that's positive. Erasing people's stories from memory is hurtful, and that's negative. Cindy says, erase is permanent, and what is erased ceases to exist. Matt says, people want to erase things they are ashamed of or not proud of, and erasing them seems to mean not needing to face them or be honest about them. Michelle also points out erase can mean to have a second chance to get it right. So that's what this activity is all about, those things that you're already pointing out. How can we think about the word erasure and consider both its negative possibilities and everything that it has meant throughout history, as well as what we can take action on and use for resistance in our own lives? So in the rest of this activity, students will examine poems like this one from the 1619 Project by Reginald Dwayne Betts, which is an erasure of the Fugitive Slave Act, and consider the definition of erasure poetry and how it can be used as a means of resisting, challenging, and confronting pre-existing texts to form new narratives or to bring out the truth that may be hidden within that text. I want to share with you how you can access all of these resources on the Mizzen by Mott app. You'll have this text-heavy slide to return to after our session together, but I want to show you how it looks much more beautiful on that website. So encourage all of you right now, right after this webinar, to go to mizzen.org and sign up, register for a free account. Once you've done that, you'll be able to access this homepage right here. And I'm logged into the Pulitzer Center's teacher profile right now. One of the easiest ways that you can log in and find that content directly is just by going to content, filtering by publisher, and checking off that Pulitzer Center box. Once you do that, you'll be able to see activities, modules, and playlists. The module will give you a good introduction to what the 1619 project is all about, and will lead students through some of those basic themes, help them get to know Nicole Hannah-Jones and other contributors to the project a little bit better, and give them some good footing for getting into more creative projects and other project-based learning activities that they might do. The playlist can be completed in any order and will give you all kinds of short activities that you can do in your classroom. They focus on things ranging from music, which culminates in a dance party, to erasure poetry, culminating in creative work, to media literacy activities and creating timelines around stories of American history. So I'm hopeful that you'll be able to find a diversity of activities in this set that will be adaptable to your contexts, but we're also really excited to engage with all of you ongoing as a community to find out more about what you're looking for, what your needs are, and how we can support you going forward with webinars like this and chances to connect and create new resources to support you. With that, I am incredibly excited to build out a little bit of this community and welcome our presenters today. And we're going to be starting with Karlin Larkin, the Chief Academic Officer at Village Education Tutors Foundation. And Karlin is also a member of the inaugural 1619 Project Education Network cohort. Thank you so much for all of your work, Karlin, and for being here with us today. So I wonder if I could kick things over to you and just ask you to introduce yourself a little bit to us and share about your background and how you arrived at the work you do today.
Thank you, Hannah, and welcome everyone. I'm excited to be here as a part of this discussion and ongoing dialogue. As Hannah mentioned, my name is Karlin Larkin, and I'm the Chief Academic Officer at Village Education Tutors. If I were to describe who I am, I would say that I'm an instructional equity advocate that's trying to or seeking to transform the educational experience. I understood that to resolve the racialized, class-based challenges to high achievement in underrepresented communities, that leadership requires a mindset that sees beyond maintenance of schools or programs, but a charge to upend the current structure of ineffective teacher performance, low student outcomes, and little engagement with community. So my career began with textbook publishing, actually, which gave insight to a very affluent school district experience, something that was a dichotomy to my own experience. So it highlighted the disparity that is witnessed, particularly in Black and Brown neighborhoods, in terms of the school districts and the resources our young scholars have. Decisively, I became a teacher with a critical aim to get academic results. That was my purpose. My diverse background with quality non-for-profit programming with the Lutheran Social Services in St. Croix, Virgin Islands, and working with my own nonprofit, Speaking for Success, gave me insight to understanding that there has to be more than just academics, but there needs to be wellness. There needs to be a comprehensive look. So I entered the education field with the lens of an organizational leader, along with the idea of just being able to track and drive teaching outcomes. So currently, I've in the past, I've also worked in supporting school-based staff, equipping teachers to think critically and develop critical consciousness so that they are committed to equity in education as an instructional coach. And currently, I am the Chief Academic Officer at Village, which is one of the 11 grantees to receive $1 million through the Gates Foundation. So we are doing great things here in the community, first by looking through how do we develop critical consciousness in teachers. And as I speak more about the project and the lens of wellness, I'll start talking to you more about the critical consciousness approach for our classrooms and life outside of class, which is our after-school programming.
Thank you so much, Karlin. I'm perpetually floored by your range and depth of experience. So I hope folks are hearing that, like textbook publishing, founding and leading your own nonprofit after-school education network, as well as acting as chief academic officer of another very successful one now. So just be keeping in mind, we are headed toward a Q&A. Feel free to drop those into the chat anytime you want to hear more from Karlin, Ashanti, and our other presenters. And I would love to ask you next, if you could tell us a little bit more about how you enact anti-racist principles as part of the education work that you do.
Sure. I'm not sure if the slide is up yet, but if you could put up the slide, and I think that it'll begin a great discussion and serve as a visual aid to us. First, I'd like to share a quote that I think I've lived by for centuries now. It's by Frantz Fanon, and I saw Ashanti, when you turn off your camera, I saw that there was something about a mask, and it comes from his book, Black Skin, White Mask. The quote says, "I ascribe a basic importance to the phenomenon of language. To speak means to be in a position to use a certain syntax, to grasp the morphology of this or that language. But it means above all to assume a culture, to support the weight of a civilization. For so long, we've had to speak a certain language. We've had to adopt a certain culture that was not our own. And so enacting an anti-racist principle means to really adopt a new language. And that is where I begin my work in wellness, where I've begun my work in the classroom, and as well as developing teachers along the way. So in looking through, and I don't see the slide up, let me see. In looking through principles of anti-racist approaches, we want to start thinking through what is critical consciousness and how do we arrive there in a way that advocates every aspect of it. And one of the ways we do that is by looking at critical consciousness and connecting the wellness frameworks of it. You'll see that there are three categories. There's social analysis, political agency, and social action. Thinking through social analysis, we have to think through the aspect of wellness in our classrooms and after-school programming as a cultural responsive process of accountability. We're looking through it as a self-reflection opportunity, community reflection opportunity, as well as a social emotional armor. And the reason why I say that is because when social analysis really gives us the ability to analyze social, political, and economic forces and how it contributes to inequity and the aspect of inequality. Paulo Freire talks about this in his approach of pedagogy of the oppressed, and he speaks specifically about giving the power back to the people who are being affected, right? And so he pointedly states that we have to be the leaders in the oppression to be out of the oppression. We can't have those who are oppressed have to be the one that leads us out of the oppression. So with that said, we have to somehow give the power back. There has to be a transfer of power in the language that we speak, in the social actions that we involve in, so that we can transfer the power of what the civilization that we've now assumed. What's so unique about the 1619 Project is that it brings light to the fact that the resources that are here are American history resources. So it is not something that we have to earn back or find. It is what we have as a part of our history. And so, looking at social analysis and critically thinking through, our own consciousness, we have to start by understanding that this social emotional armor is actually a way for us to look at tools of transparency, starting with ourselves, and navigating those tools in a space where students can start feeling like their experience is actually a human experience. Because much of our experiences have been dehumanized within our communities. Much of our experiences have not led to positive outcomes. But if we start by looking at the marginalized aspect of it and saying, you know what, we're going to stop right here and start redefining what that looks like and combating oppression, combating violence, combating the dehumanization aspect of our communities by language that says we have not a collective struggle, but now moving from what this is as a happenstance, slavery, right? That's not, it happened. But now that was the collective struggle, but now empowering our young scholars to collective empowerment and agency. Moving on to agency, we need to consider what political agency looks like. It can't just be a conversation. It needs to be inculcated into systems. We need to think through capacity building. How do we provide procedures that will ensure that there is student voice on a consistent basis, that will ensure that we're using a language that is norming in our classrooms and after school programs. And we have to measure impact. One of the processes I use is through Harvard DataWise, and it allows us to start having conversations about data in a manner that humanizes the experience, that we're actually looking at people, not numbers. We're actually looking at quality, not just the numbers of the aspect of well, how many students have reached their goals, but why have they reached their goals? Why haven't they reached those goals? And entering into this aspect of a shared commitment to action, assessment, and the last part, which is the most important, adjustment. So we're coming from social analysis, internalizing this aspect of wellness, going into political agency, and then now we have to transfer that power back to our young scholars by giving them opportunities for social action. And that is the structure of this work when we're connecting wellness frameworks. That is, that students have voices, that they are the leaders in the work, that they are engaging into strategies, mindfulness strategies that will engage them in their current experience, as well as give them the tools to engage outside of the classroom, outside of programming, but also within their communities. And the idea is that it will lead to policy development and support. I mentioned that we are one of the grantees of the Gates Foundation. We need that level of support where we're given opportunities to confront oppressive forces and get into social action in a both individual and collective way. So I'll pause here because the next conversation really is going to get into the specifics of, well, how do we actually do this? How do we go through this continuum of social analysis, political agency, and social action in our work?
Thanks, Karlin. Yeah, and finally, as a little bit of a case study and deep dive into something you've already started talking about, I would love to hear a little bit more about your work specifically with the 1619 project, what that's looked like and how you see the value of those resources for the students you support as well as for educators.
Thank you. And so, as you can see, I have not been traditional in my path. And so this is going to be very much in the same spirit that the modules that we're creating here is a unit plan that focuses on DEI discussions as it pertains specifically to young ladies in our Algebra 1 equity program. And the resources are developed so that we could celebrate diverse cultures, as well as bring light to things that are real experiences. So I'd like to start by thinking through Nicole Hannah-Jones and her experience. In one of her podcasts, what we learned is that she walked into the classroom as a young scholar and was given an assignment and her assignment was to do research and report out on this research about who you are. Where do you come from? So she walked up to the globe and she just spun the globe and chose a random place in Africa. We know the continent Africa is huge, but she just chose one country just to represent whatever she thought she could come from. That experience highlighted something for me. It highlighted that she had an internal struggle. It highlighted that she possibly did not feel like she had a place. And it also highlighted that she was alone in this process. I know that for myself, I've done all of the research about educating myself on the African diaspora and who I am. It wasn't taught in my history classes. And so we explore this idea that there is a notion of imposter syndrome, this displacement of who you are as a part of the American history. And our modules highlights Nicole Hannah-Jones in her perspective and began to ask guiding questions like, what are your contributions as a young woman in the BIPOC community? And how have you felt like you don't belong? So by no means are we diagnosing or saying that anybody has imposter syndrome, but we're getting into this problem or a problem posed approach, meaning that, and Paulo Freire talks about it a lot, is that you are investigating this aspect of, could this be your experience, looking at Nicole Hannah-Jones' experience? Because what we don't want to do is what has always been done, is that we're telling people what they have or what they're experiencing. Instead, we're asking our young scholars to actually investigate some of these feelings, investigate this aspect of whether I belong, and then also develop this social emotional armor, which becomes the tool for truly advocating for yourself. And the other modules begin to explore ways that they could rewrite their own stories. There is one module we entitled Equity Talks, Ida Bae Wells, which is BAE as the slang. And that is actually coming from Nicole Hannah-Jones' Twitter handle. And she began to talk about her journey to journalism, looking at people who have done it and untold stories. And so we're looking through, well, how do I write my own story? What resources do I have that tells me a little bit about who has already done it and how well they've done it? And the wellness focus here is like, does that thought actually help or hinder me? So there's a lot of aspect of, internalizing who you are and looking through the unvarnished truth of whether I'm here because I've earned it or I'm here because of something else. We're going to start looking through dismantling untruths about youth, thinking about and discussing aspects of indecisiveness and conflict averse. Those are some of the gems of the modules, but ultimately what it does is that it highlights this aspect of denied freedom because of the conversation of what democracy should be. And you can't have democracy without actually having the knowledge or the truth, right? And so the idea is that we are giving our community an opportunity to, again, move from a collective struggle of something that's happened to our community, happened to them, that's happening to collective empowerment and agency in the process.
Karlin, thank you so much. And we can send some appreciation to Karlin in the chat. I have so many more questions for you, and hopefully we'll get to return to some that our participants have for you in just a few minutes. But just want to thank you for being with us and sharing all of your work today. And with that, we're going to turn things over to Ashanti Branch for a little bit more on some of these similar themes. And Ashanti is the founder and executive director of the Ever Forward Club, and we're so lucky to have him with us today. So please send some welcomes and some appreciations for our presenters in the chat. Ashanti, I'll turn things over to you.
I'm glad to be here with you all. Karlin, thank you for going first, because now I know what I'm going to say. because at first, so they told me I got 7 minutes. I want to tell you that talking 7 minutes is actually pretty complicated. Like I can do 30, I can do an hour, I can do 2 hours. 7 minutes is going to be hard. So you already see in the intro, I'm already doing 1 minute here. Listen, I was born and raised in Oakland, California. I was raised by a single mother. My father died before I was born. It wasn't my opinion. No, nobody asked me my opinion about this situation. I started on the planet and life was a mess. Felt like a waterfall was happening. Like I was already in turbulent waters. My mom didn't want to be on welfare. My mom was a proud woman. She didn't want to be poor. But what do you do when all of a sudden you're about to raise this boy in the world and now half of your income has been taken away? How do you survive? My mom was a college student. I'm so thankful that my mom held on to me. Of all the things as a 22-year-old young woman in Oakland, California could have done, like I'm thankful that she loved me enough. Now, I didn't like her a lot growing up, but I love her. I'm thankful for her. I realized the journey that she, as her first child, her first boy, trying to figure out what does it mean, but what do I know? And what does my mom really know about what it means to be a man? Like my mom has never been a man. She's not a man. She can tell me maybe the qualities of a man she wants to see in me, but the how to do those are very different. I remember in 1977, I don't remember in 77, but I'm gonna tell you in the movie Roots came out. Now, I was born in 74. I remember being 5 years old, 6 years old, maybe around 7. I don't know how old I was, but I remember early on my mom sitting us down and watching Roots. Now, first of all, I was confused as to, hey, what's going on here? And this guy on this movie Roots, if you haven't seen it, I encourage you at some point to watch it. But Alex Haley wrote the book Roots about his family history, but it's a story from slavery to whatever, 77, I guess. This Kunta Kinte was a slave who did not want to change his name, who fought against people calling him his name, and they wanted to call him a different name. Now, my mom named me Ashanti. Now, I don't know, Ashanti may be cool today because there was a singer once who was famous, but Ashanti wasn't cool when I was in middle school, elementary school. Ashanti, no one could pronounce it. Everyone made fun of me. Like, I hated it. And so watching this person in this film have their name changed, fighting against wanting to own that name. And why am I starting there? Well, I just want to know, we can start anywhere in this conversation. I want to let you know that what I'm really excited about, and one thing that Karlin talked about was in her journey of decisively becoming a teacher. I want to tell you, I became a teacher. I didn't want to be a teacher. I wanted to be rich. I knew what poor felt like, and I'm like, that's not so fun. So why don't I find a job where I would never, ever be poor again? They said, Ashanti, you're good at math. You should be a math teacher. I mean, you should, no, they didn't say that. They didn't say that. They said, Ashanti, you're good at math. You should be an engineer. I mean, you can see math teachers in me because I became a math teacher. But as an engineer in California, I made a lot of money. I felt really proud of myself. I think when you tell somebody that you're an engineer, like you can see the look on their face. And because I was raised by a mother and I was the oldest, I knew what air traffic control was in my house. You see, my job as the oldest was to make sure that when my mom came home, that I was to keep everything calm in the house. At 7 years old, I was the man of the house. My uncle said, Ashanti, you got to take care of your mom and your sister and your brother. And I'm like, Uncle, can you find the man who's supposed to be doing this job? Because I just want to go outside and play. Like, I don't really want this job. Why am I starting there with this part of the story? I'm starting way back, right? But why am I starting there? In order for me to help you understand why I'm in the work I'm doing today, it started on a journey of trying to figure out what it meant to be a good man without a man around helping me figure it out. I think a lot of our young people today are trying to figure out how do they exist in the bodies they're in, and what if nobody's showing you how? Everyone has expectations of you. Everyone has responsibilities they put on you, but what if they don't give you the tools to navigate those? I mean, I knew that if I studied hard and I went to college and I got a good job and I made a lot of money, they told me I could live happily ever after. They told me it was a 5-point plan. Okay, study hard, go to college, get a good job, make a lot of money, happy ever after, sign me up for that plan. And so my journey to education was because I wanted to live happily ever after. I wasn't trying to be an intellectual. I wasn't trying to show how smart. I was like, hey, happy ever after is on the way if I work hard right now. And the journey was getting through whatever mundane classes they taught me, whatever nonsense they wanted me to read. When my history teacher started talking about history of the United States, now U.S. history you take in the junior year, U.S. history. Now, me being an intelligent kid who at 7 years old, 5 years old, watched Roots, to have someone try and tell me what US history was that didn't make sense because I saw it on TV. I mean, you could say, well, Roots is not real. Well, my mom taught me more than just Roots, but that was where my lessons began. So to be in a school and to have my mom grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, in a place that doesn't look like California, it doesn't act like California in many ways, but to go visit Little Rock, Arkansas on so many occasions and hear people call my mom a gal, call my uncle's boy. And my mom, the reason she left Little Rock, Arkansas was because my grandmother said, girl, you're going to get us killed with your big mouth. You're going to have to go to California and live with your daddy because California would accept you having more of an opinion. Little Rock, Arkansas, you don't get to have much of an opinion, is what my family told me. You got to just keep it under the radar. You got to keep it cool. Don't get too, you may be upset about some stuff, but you just kind of keep it to yourself. Maybe you keep it in your own doors. My mom wasn't willing to do that. And so why am I in this work? I think I'm in this work because as a little boy growing up, I was trying to figure out not only how to be in this body that I'm in, but how to be a Black boy who was kind of smart, but had to pretend like I wasn't. Because in my community, smart's not cool. So what if I want to have this plan, this formula to go to college and get a good job, make a lot of money, but I got a community around me that says, oh, you a nerd? I haven't heard of the book Black Skin, White Mask, but I'm going to order it today because I want to read it. Because what I do know is I had to constantly be challenged by who I was. Oh, you think you smart? Is that a bad thing? Or you think you cool? Because you got to, like, I remember hiding tests in my bottom of my backpack so people didn't know I got a good score on a test. Maybe you haven't experienced that, but I want to tell you that I've experienced that. And I think it goes a little deeper. Let me bring it more present. I want to bring it more present. And I think the best way for me to do that is I want to show you a quick video. Carlos mentioned in the beginning, my siempre adelante, like I speak Spanish. I love Spanish language. I have 2 godsons, actually maybe 4 of them. And I may have many godsons in the country of Mexico. I spent many times there. I do speak Spanish. I love spending time with my family there. But I do want you to know that I've also grew up in Oakland, California, was learning mind your own business. So I'm going to tell you a quick story, and I'm looking at my time because I'm almost out of time already. God, okay. Look. There's nowhere near enough time for me to tell you what I want to tell you. But let me tell you this. The program that I started, the Ever Forward Club, was designed because I saw young men who were smart, who didn't know that they could show how smart they were. We created a program for them to talk about the emotions that they were going through because contrary to popular belief, men have emotions. And some scientists will tell you that boys growing up are probably more emotional than girls, but we trained it out of them. Why are our jails 94% men? Well, because we told men they can't show half of their feelings. So therefore, what do? They only got a couple of to rest on. They got anger, they got whatever, I don't care, or they got funny. And you may have a lot more emotions in your toolbox, but when I grew up, those are all the emotions I had. Here's what I'm clear about with more than anything. Our young men daily are operating in schools that are dominated by women. And if you think about our Black boys, they're dominated by schools. Our education system is dominated by white women. 75% of educators are white women. Now, I have many white women teachers who were nice and kind to me. And I've had some who I knew didn't like me. And because I was an emotional scientist at 7 years old, I knew how to read people quick. Here's what I'm clear about. If you don't like me, guess what? The feeling's probably going to be mutual. And I'm clear about 2 things that will happen in this class today. Nobody's going to learn nothing. Now, I didn't want to be a knucklehead, but I was at it in my journey of education. When I became a teacher, I saw young people in my class who were smart, who were hiding it, and I couldn't let that happen. Our work around education is giving young people space to be fully themselves and whole. And the last thing I'll say is a young man I spoke to yesterday got kicked out of class, a 6th grader. Somebody in his group told him, I'm not going to talk to you. Now, they're working as a group project. Nobody's talking to you, not talking to you in a group. You need them. The last thing I'll say, I asked him, well, what happened? He said, I went to another group. Okay, he went to go find a solution. The teacher then said, hey, go to the office. You don't want to go back to your group. Go back to the office, go back to your group. He went back to his group and he said something under his breath. He said something like, our group is a bunch of assholes. Now, that's 6th grader. Now, I said to him, And you may have a lot of things that you would say to this sixth grader. That's not appropriate language. That's not what you should say. Here's what I said to him. I said, oh man, that's probably what I would have said. Like I identify with this young man who was in a place who felt unwanted, unwelcome, unsupported, and he had a real emotion. Now, he may learn how to have better ways of dealing with it, but the feeling is probably real. And where do you get to go to deal with real feelings, real emotions in a healthy way? We got to teach them. And I think that first starting with who we are, where we started from, and not letting anybody erase us. And I'll stop there because I could talk for way longer. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. I'm Ashanti Branch. I'm the founder of Ever Forward Club, and I hope to connect with you again soon. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ashanti. Folks, please send some appreciation and some love for our presenters into the chat. Ashanti, hopefully you've already seen, there are a lot of folks saying, please give Ashanti more time, and that they want to hear a lot more that you have to say. So everybody, I know that we're about out of time for our webinar today. But, and we also acknowledge that some of you may be on breaks right now, may need to sign off. Know that we'll be sending you the recording, the slides, and all of that after today, information on how to register for the webinar. But this is a question for all three of you. Do you by any chance have another 5 minutes just for a couple of questions so that folks can hear a little bit more from our awesome presenters today? Okay, cool. So if you're able to stick around, please do. Feel free to keep throwing your questions into the Q&A box if you have them for Ashanti, for Karlin, and for Carlos. But maybe we can just get started with a bit of a general question about your work. I'm curious to know for all of you as very experienced after-school educators, we're having this conversation related to the 1619 project, which is about teaching some hard histories and difficult topics. And all of you have done a lot of work around wellness in your classrooms and making sure that that students are safe in the spaces that they're in, even if they're not comfortable with the material that's being presented. So do you have any advice or strategies that you use in your classrooms to make sure that your students are healthy, even when you're proposing difficult topics and having those hard conversations with them?
Karlin, would you like to go first? Or I can. Yeah.
You can start off, Ashanti.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I do a lot of questioning. I do a lot of asking questions. So I think before I'm going to start giving out a lot of information in our workshop, our program is more of as a mentoring program. So when we meet with the young men in their circles, we have to break down the walls of, am I image protecting, or am I really here to be a part of the community? And so we ask a lot of questions, and we invite them to ask a lot of questions. So we start with the inquiry first, because I can spill a bunch of information on you, but if I don't know what your thoughts are and what your big questions around life, the world, history is, then I may just be hitting in all the wrong places. It's kind of like Battleship. You hope that you hit a student in the right place that is going to help them learn, but you could be going so far away, they're like, what are you talking about? So that's how we strategize around those difficult topics, asking them what they know, what they believe, where they hear it from, who they learned it from, and then trying to navigate from there. That's my fast answer.
I love how your approach takes an inquiry approach to the developing wellness. Just to even add to that, one of the approaches we use is a problem-posing approach that I'd mentioned before in terms of Paulo Freire's investigation. So it is a hard topic, and it is a part of our history. And so, approaching it with a problem-posing approach allows for us to be the analysis, the analyzers, the ones who's doing the analysis versus being someone who's kind of being analyzed all the time. And I think that's so important because it transfers that level of empowerment. And the whole idea is going in with the lens of we're developing this psychological armor, this social emotional armor. So the language that we use when we're talking about, this history needs to put the learner in the seat of power, so that they can begin to build this critical consciousness, build this, emotional intelligence that Ashanti had in sixth grade, was it sixth grade, and build this armor around, I have the right to be here. I have the right to analyze, and I am empowered to do so. And one of the things I didn't mention before is that at the end of the module, our young scholars are actually going to create their own podcast about developing their why. Why am I here? So it's not going to be a podcast about imposter syndrome. It's going to be about developing their why around this information that they have received and what they can do to move towards social action.
Thank you folks so much. And for all three of you, I'll just give you a heads up so you can prepare for a second. Would love to hear last words, anything that you want to share in just a moment. And before we do that, I just want to share with all of you who are still with us today, Karlin's amazing slide, along with the other ones we've been exploring today, will be available to you after this. Want to let you know that the Pulitzer Center is also offering for after-school educators virtual journalist visits, which are totally free for your classroom. So you can connect with journalists who do deep historical research and primary source analysis and do work connected to the 1619 project themes for your after-school classroom, as well as connect on those questions of career development and exploration. So reach out to us if you want to schedule something along those lines. And just another reminder, Carlos has been throwing this link into the chat for us. Thank you, Carlos. But sign up for that Mizzen app, get access to all of these resources and many, many more incredible resources they have to offer. Reach out to us and stay in touch. We are always ready and excited to collaborate with you. And as we've been hopefully emphasizing today, I could talk with all of these folks for a lot longer. I would like to do that. And this is the start of community building. We hope that you'll join us again for another event soon, hopefully where we'll be able to see each other's faces and share a little bit more with you. So thank you for coming to this launch event and this introduction. And with that, I'll turn things over to everybody for some last words. And maybe we can start with you, Carlos.
I'll jump in. Yeah, look, my heart is racing from Ashanti and Karlin's testimony, their experience, their life, their purpose-driven mindset. Thank you to the two of you. I'll say that Mizzen, we are all in on providing great resources for after school. We are doubling down on great content, great people, community experiences. All of this is free because through support of the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation. I mean, this is a major investment. I've been in this work 20 years. And this is the biggest investment I've seen from a content, PD, and community building perspective from a foundation. And so just come join us, sign up, join us. And there's going to be more events like this, not only with Pulitzer, but all some other amazing educators and entities that are really wanting to put, Karlin, to your point, put a student in the seat of power, right? And so I really appreciated that perspective. So thank you, folks. Thank you. I'll hand it over to Ashanti. Go for it, Ashanti. Closing thoughts.
So Ever Forward, we started a campaign called the Million Mask Movement, and our work is around helping people recognize that there's so much more going on with each of us than anybody can see by looking at us. And so if you understand this idea of masks and what we keep on the front is the things that we gladly let people see, but there's probably so many things that people have no idea. And I think oftentimes intellectually we all know that. And educators, I think, intellectually know that, but what happens in the moment, in the heat of the classroom, or we judge based on behavior and we judge based on what we see, and we could be missing so much. And so that work is around helping people just recognize there's so much more to us. That's our work. And the quote we use in our work is the longest distance that most people travel is the 18 inches between their head and their heart. And most people get stuck in their heads. And so our work is about inviting people to connect back to their hearts, especially their teachers and educators, why they're in this work. And if they're not in for the right reason, please leave. But we invite them that if they're in it for the right reason and to help all of our kids, then we want them, then we want to support them because we need wellness not only for our young people, but for our adults as well. So thank you, everybody. And good to see you all.
I am just so excited that you said that. It's just like truly a segue to what I was going to close with. This work is work that is strategic. and it requires strategic leadership. So thank you all for being a part of this work. And thank you for everybody who's joined for staying in it. There are pressures of programming and designing something that will evince results and also catapults you into a culture of intersectionality in which the therapy that you seek to give, you sometimes have to navigate with people who are still healing and in the process of healing. So we're talking about imposter syndrome, but it could be a stage that you're currently in as you're navigating this space, and as you're also making sure that our scholars are developing these psychological armors, a social emotional armor. So I really want to close with: take care of yourself, practice wellness for yourself, and then everything else will benefit our society and our community.
Thank you so much, Carlos, Ashanti, and Karlin. We're so glad to be with you. Big thanks also to my colleague, Marielle, who has been doing behind the scenes work on this webinar. Thank you, Marielle. And thank you all for joining us today. Sending you wellness, hoping that you find joy in the midst of all of the challenges of this work, and stay in touch, stay in community. We hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Carlos. Thanks, Karlin. Nice to meet you.
Everyone. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful week, wonderful day. All right now.
Bye, everyone.